What if I told you that some of the most powerful superfoods in human history have been sitting right under our noses, and we've been poisoning them with weed killer? These vegetables once saved entire civilizations from starvation, and today we walk past them like they never existed. Picture this. It's 1347. The Black Death is sweeping across Europe, crops are failing, and people are dying by the millions. But in some villages, families are surviving, not because they're lucky, but because they're eating vegetables that most of us have never even heard of. These weren't just food. They were medicine, survival tools, and the backbone of human civilization for over 1,000 years. They fed kings and peasants alike, survived ice ages, and carried our ancestors through famines that would devastate us today. But somewhere along the way, we forgot about them. Modern agriculture decided they weren't profitable enough, pretty enough, or fast enough to grow. So we abandoned vegetables that could grow in frozen ground for ones that die if you look at them wrong. Today, we're going to rediscover 10 of these lost superfoods and learn why our medieval ancestors might have been eating better than we are. Skirret. In the royal kitchens of medieval England, there was one vegetable that appeared at every feast, from the humblest cottage to the grandest castle. It wasn't exotic or expensive, it was reliable. This was skirret. Imagine a root vegetable that tastes like a cross between a carrot and a parsnip, but sweeter. Something that could be roasted, boiled, baked into pies, or even eaten raw. But here's what made skirret truly special. It was virtually indestructible. Medieval farmers would plant skirret once and harvest from the same spot for years. The roots would multiply underground like a natural savings account, growing larger and more numerous with each season. When winter came and other crops died, skirret sat safely beneath the frozen soil, ready to feed families when spring arrived. The nutritional profile was remarkable. Skirret provided complex carbohydrates, essential minerals, and enough calories to sustain hard-working peasants through brutal winters. It was so reliable that some historians believe the crop failures that led to famines could have been prevented if more people had grown skirret. But skirret had one fatal flaw in the modern world. It didn't look perfect. The roots were often twisted and irregular, making them difficult to package and sell. When potatoes arrived from the New World, offering similar nutrition in a more uniform package, skirret was quietly forgotten. Today, you can still find skirret seeds from specialty suppliers, but most people have never tasted the vegetable that kept their ancestors alive. Alexander's. The Romans called it the black potherb, and when they conquered Britain, they brought along this remarkable plant that would soon make itself completely at home. Alexander's didn't just grow, it thrived, spreading along coastlines and roadsides with the determination of a weed but the usefulness of a garden crop. What made Alexander's extraordinary was its generosity. Every part of the plant was edible and delicious. The thick, hollow stems tasted like a more flavorful version of celery. The leaves provided a peppery bite similar to parsley, but with more complexity. The seeds were so flavorful that medieval cooks used them like expensive spices. Even the bright yellow flowers could be tossed into salads or used as garnish. For medieval families, Alexander's was like having an entire grocery store growing wild on their doorstep. It required no cultivation, no watering, no weeding. It simply grew wherever the Romans had passed, creating abundant food sources that lasted for centuries. The plant was particularly valuable because it provided fresh greens during the hunger gap, those difficult weeks in late winter and early spring when stored food was running low but new crops hadn't yet sprouted. While other families struggled with scurvy and malnutrition, those who knew about Alexander's stayed healthy and strong. But by the 18th century, celery had arrived from the Mediterranean with better marketing and more refined growing techniques. Alexander's was gradually replaced by this more civilized cousin, and soon people forgot that their countryside was filled with a superior alternative that required no work to maintain. Good King Henry. In the herb gardens of medieval monasteries, there grew a plant so useful that monks called it Good King Henry, after the French King Henry IV, who was beloved for caring for his people. This humble plant embodied that same generous spirit. Good King Henry was essentially 3 vegetables in one. In early spring, families would harvest the young shoots that emerged from the ground. These tasted remarkably like asparagus and provided crucial vitamins after a long winter of preserved foods. Throughout the growing season, the broad leaves could be picked and cooked exactly like spinach, offering iron and other essential nutrients. Later in the year, the flower buds could be harvested and prepared like broccoli, adding variety to the medieval diet. But perhaps most remarkably, Good King Henry was a perennial. Once planted, it would grow in the same spot for decades, requiring nothing but occasional harvesting. The plant actually improved with age, sending up more shoots and producing larger leaves as its root system matured. Medieval families treated their Good King Henry patches like family heirlooms, passing them down through generations. A well-established patch could feed a family continuously from early spring through late fall, year after year, without replanting or special care. The nutritional benefits were extraordinary. Good King Henry contained more iron than modern spinach, substantial amounts of vitamin C, and protein levels that rivaled many modern vegetables. For peasant families who rarely ate meat, this plant provided essential nutrients that kept them healthy and strong. Today, Good King Henry is considered a lost crop, available only from specialty seed companies and grown by a handful of heritage gardeners who remember its value. Medlar. In the orchards of medieval estates, there grew a peculiar fruit that embodied one of the strangest food philosophies in human history. The medlar taught our ancestors that sometimes the best things come to those who wait, and that appearances can be deceiving. Fresh from the tree, medlars are completely inedible. They're hard, astringent, and bitter enough to make your face pucker. But medieval people discovered something remarkable. If you harvested these fruits in late autumn and stored them carefully for several weeks, allowing them to undergo a process called bletting, something magical happened. During bletting, the medlar's hard flesh would soften and its harsh tannins would break down, transforming the fruit into something that tasted like a combination of cinnamon, apple, and wine. The texture became creamy and custard-like, so delicious that medieval poets wrote verses praising the medlar's unique charms. Medieval families would harvest medlars just before the first frost and store them in cool, dry places until they reached perfect ripeness. The timing was crucial. They had to be soft enough to eat, but not so far gone that they spoiled. Master the technique, and you had access to fresh, sweet fruit well into winter when no other fruit was available. Medlars were turned into preserves, jellies, and wines that could last for months. The fruit was particularly prized because it ripened just as winter approached, providing a final burst of sweetness and nutrition before the harsh months ahead. But modern consumers, accustomed to fruit that looks perfect on grocery store shelves, couldn't appreciate a fruit that was supposed to look rotten. The medlar's strange appearance and unusual ripening process made it unsuitable for commercial agriculture, and it gradually disappeared from orchards and tables. Chickweed. Walk through any medieval village in winter, and you'd likely see children and adults alike foraging for a small, delicate plant growing close to the ground. To modern eyes, chickweed looks like an unremarkable weed, but to our ancestors, it was a lifesaver. Chickweed was nature's winter insurance policy. While other plants died back in cold weather, chickweed continued growing, providing fresh greens when stored food was running low and scurvy was a constant threat. Medieval people knew that eating chickweed regularly could prevent the bleeding gums, weakness, and tooth loss that came from vitamin deficiency. What they didn't know, but modern science has confirmed, is that chickweed contains 7 times more vitamin C than oranges. It's also packed with vitamins A and D, minerals like iron and calcium, and compounds that have anti-inflammatory properties. Medieval mothers would send their children to gather chickweed during winter months, knowing that the tender leaves and stems would keep their families healthy. The plant was so nutritious that chickens fed on it would lay eggs with bright orange yolks and stronger shells, hence the name chickweed. Beyond its nutritional value, chickweed was used medicinally. Herbalists would make poultices from the plant to treat wounds, rashes, and inflamed joints. The cooling properties of chickweed made it valuable for treating fevers and skin conditions. The plant's ability to grow almost anywhere, in gardens, along paths, in disturbed soil, made it accessible to even the poorest families. It required no cultivation, no special knowledge, and no resources beyond the ability to identify and harvest it. Today, chickweed is considered a lawn weed and is actively killed with herbicides. We're literally poisoning one of nature's most generous nutritional gifts because it doesn't fit our aesthetic preferences for manicured lawns. Scorzonera. In the monastery gardens of medieval Europe, monks cultivated a root vegetable with an almost mystical reputation. Scorzonera, with its jet black skin and pristine white flesh, was believed to have magical properties. And in terms of nutrition and storage, it almost did. The long black roots could be stored for months in simple sand cellars without any refrigeration. While other vegetables rotted or withered, Scorzonera remained fresh and crisp throughout the winter, providing essential nutrition when fresh food was scarce. Medieval cooks prized Scorzonera for its unique flavor, sweet and nutty, with hints of both asparagus and parsnip. The roots could be boiled, roasted, or baked, and they retained their flavor and texture even after months of storage. For medieval families facing long, harsh winters, Scorzonera was literally a lifesaver. The plant was particularly valuable during religious fasting periods. Monks would rely on Scorzonera and other vegetables during Lent and other times when meat was forbidden. The root's rich, satisfying flavor helped make these austere meals more palatable and nutritious. Medieval herbalists also valued Scorzonera for its medicinal properties. They used it to treat various ailments and believed it could purify the blood and improve overall health. Modern research has shown that Scorzonera contains significant amounts of inulin, a prebiotic fiber that supports digestive health. So the medieval herbalists weren't wrong about its health benefits. But Scorzonera's unusual appearance made it unsuitable for modern grocery stores. The black twisted roots looked too strange for consumers accustomed to uniform, attractive vegetables. As agricultural production shifted toward crops that could be easily packaged and sold, Scorzonera was left behind. Welsh onions. In the kitchen gardens of medieval Wales, and indeed throughout Northern Europe, grew a plant that represented the perfect gardening investment. Welsh onions, despite their name, weren't actually from Wales and weren't technically onions, but they possessed a superpower that made them invaluable to our ancestors. Plant Welsh onions once, and they would multiply continuously for decades. Unlike regular onions that had to be replanted each year, Welsh onions were perennial, forming clumps that grew larger and more productive with each passing season. A single planting could feed a family for generations. The hollow, tubular leaves were the primary harvest. These scallions could be cut repeatedly throughout the growing season, and the plant would simply regrow them. Even in winter, when other crops were dormant, Welsh onions often continued producing fresh green growth, providing essential vitamins and flavor when few other fresh foods were available. Medieval families valued Welsh onions not just for their productivity, but for their hardiness. The plants could survive harsh winters that killed other crops, drought conditions that stressed other vegetables, and poor soil that wouldn't support more demanding plants. They were essentially foolproof. The flavor was more complex than modern scallions, sharper and more distinctive, with a depth that enhanced everything from simple peasant stews to elaborate court dishes. Medieval cooks used Welsh onions fresh, dried them for winter storage, and even pickled them in vinegar. Perhaps most importantly, Welsh onion patches were often inherited property, passed down from parent to child like any other valuable asset. A well-established patch could provide food security for multiple generations with minimal maintenance. Modern agriculture abandoned Welsh onions in favour of annual crops that could be grown uniformly and harvested mechanically. We traded sustainability and food security for convenience and profit. Lovage. In the herb gardens of medieval monasteries and manor houses grew a plant that embodied abundance. Lovage was the gentle giant of the medieval garden, towering 6 feet tall, living for decades, and providing more flavour per leaf than anything else medieval cooks had access to. A single lovage leaf could season an entire pot of soup or stew. The flavour was like celery intensified and refined, with complex notes that enhanced everything it touched. Medieval cooks learned to use lovage sparingly because its flavour was so concentrated and distinctive. But lovage was more than just a seasoning. Medieval physicians and herbalists valued it as a medicinal plant. They used lovage to treat digestive problems, kidney ailments, and respiratory issues. The plant was considered a general tonic, something that improved overall health and vitality when consumed regularly. The monks who grew lovage understood that it was an investment in the future. Once established, a lovage plant would provide flavourful leaves for 20 years or more, growing larger and more productive with age. The massive root systems could also be harvested and used both culinarily and medicinally. Medieval travellers and pilgrims would often seek out monasteries known for their lovage, not just for the excellent food, but because meals seasoned with lovage were believed to aid digestion and prevent illness. Crucial benefits for people undertaking long, difficult journeys. The plant's impressive size and longevity made it a symbol of stability and abundance. Having a mature lovage plant in your garden was a sign of prosperity and good planning, much like having a well-stocked pantry or a healthy savings account. Modern cuisine largely forgot about lovage as it couldn't compete with the convenience of dried packaged herbs that could be shipped globally and stored indefinitely. We traded a sustainable, living flavour source for the convenience of spice racks. Tansy. In the gardens of medieval Europe grew a plant with attitude. Tansy didn't just flavour food, it made a statement. With its bright yellow button flowers and intensely bitter leaves, tansy was the punk rock herb of the medieval garden, demanding respect and attention. Medieval cooks used tansy's aggressive flavour strategically. A small amount could transform simple dishes, adding complexity and depth that masked the sometimes questionable quality of preserved foods. Tansy was particularly popular in Easter puddings and cakes, where its bitter notes provided a counterpoint to sweet ingredients. But tansy's real value lay in its practical applications beyond cooking. Medieval families discovered that tansy was a natural pest deterrent. Dried tansy scattered around grain stores would keep mice and insects away. Fresh tansy hung in kitchens and pantries created an invisible barrier that protected food from pests. The plant's preservative properties made it invaluable for food storage. Tansy could be used to preserve meat, extending its shelf life in an era before refrigeration. Medieval cooks would wrap meat in tansy leaves or add tansy to salt cures, knowing that the plant's natural compounds would help prevent spoilage. Medieval physicians valued tansy for its medicinal properties. They used it to treat digestive problems, fevers, and various ailments. The plant was considered a powerful medicine, but one that required knowledge and respect. Too much tansy could be harmful, so medieval herbalists were careful about dosages. Tansy was also used in medieval brewing. Brewers would add small amounts to ale and beer, both for flavour and for tansy's preservative properties. This helped prevent spoilage and added complexity to simple grain-based beverages. Modern cuisine largely abandoned tansy because its flavour was too intense and unfamiliar for contemporary palates. We chose milder, more predictable herbs over the bold complexity that tansy offered. Turnip greens. In medieval households, nothing was wasted, and nowhere was this principle more evident than in how families approached turnips. While modern cooks focus solely on the root, medieval families knew that the real treasure was growing above ground. Turnip greens were nutritional powerhouses that put the root itself to shame. The leafy tops contained 4 times more calcium than the turnip root, 3 times more vitamin A, and significantly more protein. For medieval families who rarely had access to dairy products or meat, turnip greens provided essential nutrients that were otherwise difficult to obtain. The harvesting strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Medieval gardeners would continuously harvest the outer leaves throughout the growing season while leaving the center to continue growing. This provided a steady supply of fresh greens from spring through fall, while the root continued developing underground for winter storage. This dual-purpose approach meant that a single turnip plant could feed a family multiple times, first through its leaves during the growing season, then through its stored root during winter. It was the ultimate expression of medieval efficiency and resourcefulness. Turnip greens were particularly valuable during the hunger gap in late winter and early spring. When stored vegetables were running low and new crops hadn't yet sprouted, families could rely on turnip greens that emerged early from overwintered roots to provide fresh nutrition. Medieval cooks prepared turnip greens much like we prepare modern leafy greens, sautéed with onions, added to soups and stews, or simply boiled and seasoned. The flavor was similar to mustard greens, with a slight spicy bite that added interest to simple meals. The calcium content was particularly important for medieval children and women, who often suffered from calcium deficiency due to limited access to dairy products. Turnip greens helped prevent the bone problems and dental issues that plagued many medieval populations. Today, most turnips are sold with their greens removed, and consumers throw away the most nutritious part of the plant without even knowing what they're missing: the hidden truth. After exploring these 10 forgotten vegetables, a disturbing pattern emerges. These weren't inferior crops that were rightfully abandoned. They were often superior to what replaced them, more nutritious, more sustainable, more reliable, and perfectly adapted to feeding human populations through difficult times. So why did we abandon them? The answer lies in the fundamental shift that occurred in how we think about food. Medieval agriculture was designed around human survival and nutrition. Plants were valued for their ability to keep people alive and healthy, regardless of how they looked or how easy they were to transport. Modern agriculture operates on entirely different principles. Crops are valued for their ability to be mass-produced, shipped long distances, stored for extended periods, and sold at profit. Nutritional value, sustainability, and resilience became secondary considerations. This shift happened gradually over several centuries, but it accelerated dramatically in the 20th century as agriculture became industrialized. Vegetables that couldn't be grown with machines, harvested mechanically, or packaged attractively were gradually eliminated from commercial production. The consequences of this shift extend far beyond individual health. We've created a food system that's incredibly vulnerable to disruption. Our reliance on a small number of uniform crops, grown in vast monocultures and shipped globally, makes us vulnerable to disease outbreaks, climate change, and supply chain disruptions in ways that medieval communities never were. Medieval families with their diverse gardens of hardy, nutritious vegetables were actually more food secure than many modern families who depend entirely on grocery stores supplied by industrial agriculture. The path forward. The story of these forgotten vegetables isn't just about the past, it's about the future. As we face climate change, soil depletion, and increasing awareness of the nutritional poverty of modern diets, these medieval crops offer solutions that have been tested over centuries. Every one of these vegetables can still be grown today. Specialty seed companies maintain collections of these heritage varieties, and a growing movement of gardeners and farmers is working to bring them back. You can order seeds for Skirret, Good King Henry, Scorzonera, and the others online and grow them in your own garden. But bringing back these crops requires more than just planting seeds. It requires relearning forgotten knowledge about how to grow, harvest, store, and prepare foods that have been out of common use for generations. It also requires changing our expectations about what food should look like and how it should behave. These vegetables often don't conform to modern standards of uniformity and appearance, but they offer nutritional and environmental benefits that far outweigh their cosmetic shortcomings. Perhaps most importantly, growing and eating these forgotten vegetables connects us to thousands of years of human wisdom about food and survival. Our ancestors weren't primitive or ignorant. They were highly sophisticated in their understanding of nutrition, sustainability, and food security. By rediscovering their crops, we might just rediscover some essential truths about how to feed ourselves well in an uncertain world. The future of food might indeed be found in the past, growing quietly in medieval gardens that still exist in seed collections and heritage farms around the world. The question isn't whether these vegetables deserve a place in our modern world. It's whether we're wise enough to welcome them back. If you made it this far, you're officially smarter than the average grocery store. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we dig up more buried history, ancient secrets, and the forgotten genius of the past. Who knows what else the medieval world can teach us about surviving the future? I'll see you in the next video.